Welcome back to the Panic Room, everyone, and to episode 3, where we dive into the Madman's Library. Now, if you haven't been watching this series, I will link episodes 1 and 2 down below. In this series, we are going through, chapter by chapter, the Madman's Library. Now, obviously, if you want a little bit of the backstory as to why we're doing this, you can check out those other episodes, but suffice it to say, I fell in love with this book via the podcast, Mysterious Universe. And this book is a book lover's dream. So let's dive into the next chapter, cryptic books. So I don't know about you guys, but I have always been fascinated with codes. I actually had, if I can find it, I'll put a picture of it here. I had a book as a kid, and I think the title of the book was called The Codebreaker Kids. And I loved that. It had a number of different codes and things like that in the book, but it was centered around these two kids that their whole business was cracking codes or helping people put things in code, which I loved. Another kind of in the same vein little book series that I liked as a kid was Encyclopedia Brown. And again, I'll put a picture here in case you guys are interested for your own kids. But a lot of times his stories, he was like a mystery detective, but sometimes his stories had codes in them as well. So I've always loved the idea of codes. And this chapter was one of our shorter chapters in this book, but it did not disappoint. Oh my gosh, there's some wild stuff in here. So let's dive in. So the first thing that the author goes over in this book is the idea of writing codes on the inside of an egg without cracking the shell. Now, I've heard about this, but I had no idea like the process or anything like that. And apparently it was developed during the Spanish Inquisition because the guy who developed it noticed that the guards would look through all their shit, but they never really messed with the eggs because they didn't want to like crack them, I guess. So he developed this way of writing coded messages on the inside of an egg, which is fantastic. Guys, have you ever stopped to think about all of the things that have been invented before us? Like, I don't know about you, but it's fascinating to me. Like, I cannot fathom coming up with something just out of nothing the way these people did, you know? Like, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm selling myself short here, but I just, it fascinates me that in our history, we have these people who were able to think so far outside of the box and come up with all these amazing processes and items, you know? It's so fascinating to me. So this guy's name, and you guys know, I butchered a lot of the names we've talked about in this book and in this series, and today's going to be no different. His name is Giambattista della Porta, and he was nicknamed the Professor of Secrets. So essentially what he did is he made an ink sourced out of alum. I think that's how you say that. And you write it on the shell, it's absorbed, and then if you boil the egg, the message comes through, which is amazing. Apparently, you know, because the author goes into a lot of things about like invisible ink. I feel like most of us as kids, you kind of did a little bit with this, like maybe with the lemon juice thing. And, you know, I never really looked into the science behind it, but he says a lot of times it's the charring of the carbon that makes the writing visible, which I thought was interesting. Now, something that was really funny is he's talking about one of the types of invisible ink, and apparently in 1641, Bishop John Wilkins recommended onion juice, alum, and ammonia salts, though one should be sure, he noted, to add the distilled juice of glowworms. So I do want to hit some of the high points here, and you guys know I will show you some pictures at the end of the video to give you some close-ups of the absolutely amazing items and artwork that are in this chapter. But the author goes into things like how, you know, people in Persia would write secret messages on tablets and then cover them with wax. So apparently some of these were even recorded by like Herodotus. So in his book, The Histories, there was a bit of a covert art form that he talked about during the attempted Persian conquest of Greece. And it says that Xerxes began gathering forces, and there was an exiled Greece named Demaratus living in the Persian city of Susa who caught wind of the plans. He managed to get word of the invasion to the people that needed to know about it by scraping the wax off of a pair of wooden folding tablets, writing on the wood underneath what Xerxes intended to do, and then covering the message with the wax again. That's pretty cool. I thought that was interesting. Oh, and another thing, Herodotus has recorded another example of a king shaving the head of his servant, tattooing the message on his head, and then allowing enough time for the hair to grow back, and then sending the servant with some like BS message, you know, and then the servant shaves his head when he gets there and like feels safe. Can you imagine? Oh my gosh. Oh, and you know how we've been talking about in the previous episodes about how humanity doesn't change and how they're super petty? So apparently there was a 14th century scribe that wanted to show how impenetrable the Gaelic script could be. So he wrote the sentence in Gaelic: "The shortest mimes of the snow gods do not wish at all in their lifetimes for the great burden of distributing the wine of the walls to be lightened." Now that's gibberish, right? But check out what it looks like in Gaelic. Isn't that something? I mean, the thing that gets me though is that this guy sat down and had to think of a sentence that looked like this just to prove a point. Petty. Petty. Humans have been petty. And I mean, what is that? 14th century. We've been petty since time began. Oh, and something else. So he's talking about like ciphers and codes. And apparently one of the best known coded works is the Kama Sutra. And yeah, we all know what the Kama Sutra is well known for. But, you know, what some people don't know is that in the book, it has advice for women about like cookery, pursuits like bookbinding, carpentry, chess, and conjuring. Now, the 45th listed art form for women, and I'm going to butcher this, the Malikicha Vikalpa, or the art of understanding writings in cipher and writing words in a peculiar way, which is noted in the book as helpful for women when they want to like have romantic interests in people. And, you know, the book was not just for women, you know, it had, you know, men using it too. So essentially what we have here is an ancient Ashley Madison. Like, apparently the book is sort of giving the vibe to the people who read it, like, hey, if you want to have this like illicit tryst with someone other than your husband or wife, here's a way to write a letter in a code that they can't crack. So yeah, we have an ancient Ashley Madison happening. I'm telling you guys, if there is anything that underlines all of our chapters so far, it's the fact that humanity does not change. Oh, and another funny thing. So it does go into like Julius Caesar and his love for ciphers. And he talks about a commentary in Julius Caesar's the Gaelic Wars, or the Gallic Wars, I think. And it says that he gives a dramatic example, sending a communication to the besieged Cicero, whose situation was so dire that he was mulling over the idea of surrender. The encrypted message was fastened to a thong of a spear and hurled into Cicero's camp. But unfortunately, it struck a tower high up and stayed embedded there for 2 days before it was even noticed and delivered to Cicero, encouraging him to keep fighting. I laughed at that. Imagine, get in your brain like an old-timey camp. Okay, you got a bunch of military dudes sitting around like smoking, eating, playing cards, whatever. And all of a sudden you just hear thunk, and everybody looks up and there's just this random spear stuck in a tower, and they're probably like, who the hell did that? And then nobody gives a shit to go get it for 2 days. So guys, then there was another one that I thought was really funny, and it was surrounding the diary of Samuel Pepys, P-E-P-Y-S, who lived from 1633 to 1703, and his diaries were written in a very cryptic shorthand. And the system was devised by a Thomas Shelton in 1628. Now, the diaries were first published in 1825, but it was barely half of the original manuscript because the man who was tasked with doing it had spent 3 years on this project, and he was completely unaware that the key to the cipher was actually like on the same shelf as the diary, but nobody bothered to look. How pissed would you be? You spent 3 years trying to crack this thing and you find out that the code to crack it was like literally on the same shelf. I would have been pissed. Oh, and another reason that there was so much of this diary omitted, because you have to remember this was being like translated and published in the late 1890s, was because this guy's diary was so full of descriptions of his like squeaky squeaky Tom and his conquests, and very descriptive like rememberings of certain anatomy, that they didn't feel like it needed to be published. And get this, so they put in here, the editor, Henry B. Wheatley, wrote in the preface, readers are asked to have faith in the judgments of the editor. So guys, then they go into some of the kind of ciphers and codes surrounding religious texts, specifically the Bible. Now, if you're interested in that, I want to say that there's been a lot done on the History Channel and stuff like that about Bible codes. And they really don't spend a whole lot of time on that in this chapter because they quickly segue into the Thevoynich Manuscript. Now, I hope I'm saying that right. I've heard of this manuscript before. As far as I'm aware, and I think as far as the author is aware, it has still not been cracked, whatever code it's written in. But to give you a little bit of backstory about it, in case you don't know anything about it, it was found in 1912 by a Polish man, Thevoynich, Wilfrid Thevoynich. It was hidden among a pile of manuscripts in Italy. And apparently this guy had just a penchant for weird shit, which, hey, I'm down for. And he donated a bunch of this stuff to the British Museum, so much so that they actually gave him his own shelf and named it by him. So yeah, apparently this manuscript has been studied and studied and studied, and people are like, hey, it's Welsh, it's German, it's this, it's that. But some people are okay, my favorite is Roger Bacon, who said that it was a alien manuscript describing alien technology that can generate DNA from sound. There's been weirdos since time began, guys. And so in this manuscript, there's different stuff. I mean, there's even plants that don't exist anymore, and people are like, oh, these are plants that were in the Garden of Eden, stuff like that. It's all speculation. But the same guy, Roger Bacon, he was my favorite. They went into a few of the different possibilities that people have said this manuscript is about, but Roger Bacon is easily my favorite. He says that this is a guide to viewing different galaxies with alien telescopes. I just love the fact that one guy sat down and was like, wow, these are plants from the Garden of Eden. And then you have this Roger guy it's aliens, aliens, aliens. So they actually did some testing on this manuscript in 2009, and it said with 95% certainty that it was written or made in the 1400s. So, that really doesn't give us a lot. It just sort of narrows down the time frame, but we still have no idea what the hell this thing says, pretty much. So then we get this really awesome story about, you guys know that a lot of ancient manuscripts were written by monks, but this particular story centers around a nun. She was having fits because she said that Beelzebub sent a bunch of demons after her, and she had to write down what they said or they were going to torment her. And so then he talks about this one thing where she was telling her sisters in their convent about how she refused to write down the last two messages, and that the demons started rubbing ink on her face and threatened to beat the shit out of her with the inkwell. So in 2017 at the London Science Center in Sicily, they were able to crack this code that she wrote these letters and these revelations from the demons in. Now, mind you, these letters and stuff were written in this 1670s, and they weren't cracked until 2017. And you might be asking yourself, how did they crack it? With an algorithm that they found on the dark web. So apparently the software was using ancient Greek, Arabic, Runic, and Latin. And it was the whole thing was set up to try to decipher archaic alphabets, and it worked on this letter. Get this, this is part of what was deciphered. So it says, the contents certainly honored its diabolical promises. The author of the letter labels God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit as dead weights and sarcastically sneers that God thinks he can free mortals with a system that works for no one. This was then followed by the revelation that God and Zoroaster are invented by men. I mean, it sounds like something a demon would say, right? No wonder the nun got pissed. Oh, and then probably one of the best stories in this chapter. And I distinctly remember the podcast, Mysterious Universe, talking about this particular story. The next one is and I'm probably going to butcher the name, the Copial cipher, which was cracked in 2011. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when this shit was cracked. Listen to this. So this manuscript that they cracked gave up that there was a secret society of German eye doctors, okay? They would get together and ritualistically pluck each other's eyebrows. It was a 105-page manuscript containing over 75,000 cryptic characters, and it held its secrets for 260 years. Okay guys, brief intermission. If you notice anything different, it is because I'm having to refilm the last like 10 minutes of this video. I don't know why, but my previous file was corrupted, so here we are to finish the video. So we were talking about the eye doctor cult. Now, I want to tell you guys the induction ceremony for this cult. This is insane. Listen to this. When a new recruit was brought in, they were given a blank piece of paper to read. Now, obviously they can't do this, right? So then the members of the cult would give them like eyeglasses of some sort and ask them to do it again. It's still blank, so they can't read it. So then the members of the cult would ask to perform the operation, which was the plucking of the eyebrows. And I guess during like the operation, you know, you got your eyes shut, somebody's all up in your face, they switch the papers to one that has writing on it. And then when the person who's getting the operation opens their eyes, they can read the paper. And they're like, oh my God, it's real, sign me up. Now they have discovered that this particular cult was like an offshoot of Freemasonry. And it was kind of like a big, you know, snub in the face to this papal decree at the time in 1738 that had a ban on Freemasonry. So they think maybe that was somewhat the origins of this. But how insane is that? Again, can you imagine like being the translator and reading this shit like, what? Eyebrows? Like, it makes me wonder, did they even know the word for eyebrow? Like before this manuscript? I bet they did after. Okay, so the next one I wanted to talk about was the Beale cipher. And I'm hoping I'm saying that right. It was a cipher made by Thomas J. Beale in the 1820s. And he was said, supposedly in this cipher, to give you the location of a treasure that he hid in Bedford County, Virginia. So the story goes that apparently Beale entrusted these 3 pages of a cipher to this particular individual who then, this guy waited 23 years to open it, to like open the cipher. And let me show you guys what the cipher looked like. Again, guys, you know you're gonna get close-ups at the end of the video. It's just numbers. So all of these ciphers were printed in a pamphlet in the 1880s, and to this day, nobody has cracked it, which is pretty interesting. But there was a skeptic by the name of Joe Nickel who points out that he thinks that the whole thing is a fraud because apparently there's some like verbiage and word usage that was not around at the time of this cipher, so who knows? So the last story I wanted to cover was concerning a man by the name of Kit Williams. And I love this. To me, this harkened back to my little Library of Horrors series. And if I can find this book, you might be seeing it in another video. But he published a picture book by the name of Masquerade. And apparently in this book, he put like clues to a treasure and somebody found it. And it was so weird. And you know what? They described how this guy cracked it, and it was something about like there was a picture of an animal and he drew a line from the animal's paw to a point in the text and it gave him a location. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it would make more sense if you had the picture in front of you rather than like reading the process. But yeah, the guy cracked it, right? So it came out later after the guy who like won and cracked this, you know, got his treasure and whatnot, that it was like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. So guys, let me read you this insane little twist. And this actually happened in the 80s, so I was too little to remember it, but if any of you remember this, comment down below, I would love to know. Then came a twist to this story. On December 11th of 1988, the Sunday Times ran a story accusing this winner of having conducted his own masquerade. Ken Thomas was revealed to be the pseudonym of Dugald Thompson, whose business partner was the boyfriend of Veronica Robertson, a former living girlfriend of Kit Williams, who had gleaned the location from the artist at that time. So essentially what we're saying is that the guy who won this changed his name because he had an association with the guy, the artist, who made the cipher and had the treasure through this ex of his. And actually in the like mid-2000s, like 2010, there was an Air Force pilot by the name of Forrest Fenn who published a memoir. And so he is also supposedly buried a treasure somewhere, I want to say like in the Midwest, like circa Colorado-esque. And so people are all over this too, like going over there trying to find it and stuff. And he's even been asked to like stop it, you know, because people have died doing this, okay? Like going up mountains when they have no business going up mountains or in caves and shit. And like, let me read you the quote. that he said when he was asked to stop. This is the second guy from the 2000s, the Forrest Fenn. We sit on our couch and watch TV or play with our little machines. We're too comfortable because we know what to expect. So he's just thrilled that people are getting outside, which I can kind of see, but kind of sort of makes him sound a little diabolical too. So guys, that's it. Thank you for hanging out for chapter 3 of our podcast book, The Madman's Library. Please, if you like this, like and subscribe. It would really help me out. And stay tuned. We've got the close-ups of this chapter coming up. Thanks again, guys, for hanging out. And until next time, bye for now.